Hello, I'm Dan Gibson, and this short video is about the database of early Islamic qiblas. After years of research, back in 2010, I published the book Quranic Geography. That book had several sections dedicated to different areas dealing with the geography of the Quran. In section 6, I dealt with Islam's holy city, and I looked at 31 mosques that I had identified from Islam's first 2 centuries. And the pattern that I noticed at that time was that the mosque qiblas seemed to be concentrated on Petra or on Mecca, and in the far west they seemed to be aligned parallel to a line drawn between Petra or Mecca. At that time, I had not yet identified the between mosques. Now, Quranic geography was misunderstood by a lot of people. I published the book not as a conclusion of my study, but as an introduction to my studies. I wanted to test the waters and to see what kind of reaction I would get. There were 3 different theories presented in the book. All of them were new ideas. I suggested that the people of Ad found in the Quran were an alliance of tribes led by the Edomites back during the 400 years that the children of Israel were in Egypt. I also suggested that the people of Thamud mentioned in the Quran were the Nabatean people who had originally built the city of Petra, and 4 other burial cities from the Negev down to Madat Salah in Saudi Arabia. At the end of the book, I tagged on my findings about the qiblas. So that was the first book. I then continued my research, and I began to hear back from people who had read the book. Some were not very happy, which was expected, and some were excited. And they suggested more places that I should look for more mosques, and so my list grew. In 2016, the film The Sacred City came out, along with the book Early Islamic Qiblas. That book concentrated on the Qibla topic and contained 64 mosques and that focused on these different areas. They included Petra and Mecca and the parallel qiblas, and I introduced in that book the idea of the between qiblas. I also explained how I measured mosques and how I thought the ancients established their qiblas. The documentary film The Sacred City has been translated into 18 languages now and was released on the internet through YouTube. At that time, I began my own YouTube channel, and I challenged my Muslim viewers to go out and to search for the oldest mosques in their areas, in their neighborhoods, and to then write me and tell me about them. And they did. Thousands of people responded with suggestions. Some went as far as becoming quite proficient in measuring qiblas. There was a lot of interest stirred from people. At that time, I expanded my definition of qiblas to include Umayaad qasrs as well as mosques. Qasrs is where we get our English word castle from, but most of them were what I might call a fortified manor house. I discovered that these early Islamic buildings contained large prayer rooms, and so the entire building was oriented in a qibla direction. As I discovered these buildings, I was adding them to the database, which had a graphical interface so that people could view them and study them on the internet. This graphical database was called the Qibla Tool, and I included it on my website, nabatea.net. Thousands of people have visited this tool and have used it to check out my studies. By the end of 2020, the list of mosques had expanded to 160 buildings from the first 3 centuries of Islam, with a couple of notable mosques from later. And so last December, that's 2020, I decided I would publish that list. Now, the problem with publishing a list is that it fixes it. but the advantage is that the database can be found and quoted by other researchers. Of course, as soon as the list was published, I was alerted of 3 more mosques that should be added. So I added them to the database, the online database, but I decided that I would publish this list every year, and so the new mosque would be in the new list. So you can find the published database at a scholarly repository known as Figshare. The URL is at the bottom of the screen and will be on the video description. This database can be added now to biographies when referencing the database because it has a DOI number. But if you want the very latest information, then you should check the Qibla tool, as I update that as soon as I firmly establish another mosque or another qasr. Now, in closing, let me state a couple of things. This is ongoing research, so the data will be updated and added to it as we go along. I am trying to list all of the qiblas from the first 2 to 3 centuries of Islam. I'm not choosing just the ones I want. I am trying to establish a comprehensive list of all of the surviving buildings from that time. As far as I know, up until now, no one has ever done this. I have tried to list the buildings in chronological order as much as possible. I feel that chronological order is very important as it reveals the development of thoughts and ideas and even the abandonment of some thoughts and some ideas. Last, I feel my role has been to introduce this list to scholars and researchers, but not to extrapolate beyond the obvious. I think that tasks of coming up with all kinds of research and other things are for others who are probably better equipped to address the issues that the list reveals. And it does cause some issues. As some of you will have seen, some scholars like Dr. David King have been livid and angry with the list because what the list seems to reveal contradicts the conclusions that he came to earlier. That may not surprise you, but Dr. King was a worldwide expert on qiblas, and rightly so. He should be. For years, he's been the go-to guy about qiblas, and 90% of his work still stands. But when it comes to understanding the qibla of the first 3 centuries of Islamic history, this list seems to tell a different story than the one that Dr. King has been championing. That is why this list is being published with very little additional data. For each building, it includes the dates when it was built, the place where it was, GPS coordinates so you can find it easily, and then 2 pieces of data that I have added. First, the direction of the qibla that I have measured, and second, my own classification of the qibla data. Whether it appears to face Mecca or Jerusalem or Petra or the between position or the parallel position. Now, I expect in the future that other scholars will visit these mosques and will remeasure them. As technology advances, I welcome them to do this and to publish their findings. I also expect that in time the mosques may be reclassified according to somebody else's theory. I welcome them to do this. So please, this video is simply an announcement that the list has been published and it is now accessible to scholars and researchers to study and to quote in their papers. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been another video in the series Talking with Dan Gibson.